The USS Defiance shook as another plasma blast hit its hull. Captain Jake Morrison gripped his command chair and watched the tactical display show more red dots than he wanted to count. The Zalkani fleet had them surrounded in the Proxima sector, and things looked bad. "Shields down to 30%, called out Lieutenant Commander Lisa Barnes from her tactical station. Her voice stayed calm, even though sweat ran down her face. "Hull breaches on decks 4 through 7. Morrison looked at the main screen, where 5 Zalkani battleships closed in on his ship. The enemy vessels looked like giant metal serpents, with their curved hulls and weapon ports that glowed like angry eyes. Behind them came 12 smaller destroyers, and a command carrier that was twice the size of the Defiance. "Chief Watson, how long until we can jump to hyperspace?" Morrison asked his chief engineer. Amy Watson's voice came through the comm system from engineering. "The drive coils are fried, Captain. I need at least 2 hours to get them working again." Morrison knew they did not have 2 hours. Maybe they did not even have 2 minutes. The Zalkani had been planning this ambush for weeks, and now the human fleet was scattered across 3 star systems. The Defiance was alone and outnumbered 15-1. "Sir, incoming transmission from the Zalkani command ship," said Communications Officer Rick Turner. "Put it on screen," Morrison ordered. The view screen flickered and showed a Zalkani commander. The alien's face looked like a cross between a snake and a lizard with yellow eyes that had no pupils. Scales covered its neck and the top of its head. When it spoke, its forked tongue flicked out between sharp teeth. "Human vessel, this is Fleet Commander Vextar of the Zalkani Empire. Your ship is damaged and your fleet has abandoned you. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated according to galactic prisoner conventions." Morrison stood up and straightened his uniform. He had fought the Zalkani for 3 years and knew they kept their word about prisoner treatment. That was more than he could say for some other alien species humans had fought. "This is Captain Morrison of the USS Defiance. We decline your generous offer." Vextar's head tilted to one side like a curious snake. "Captain, your ship cannot escape, and you cannot win this battle. Why do you choose death over captivity?" "Because we're human," Morrison said simply. The alien commander seemed to consider this answer for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. We will disable your ship and take survivors as prisoners. You have fought with honor." The transmission ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. These men and women had served with him for 2 years. They had fought together in 4 major battles and dozens of smaller ones. Many of them had families back on Earth or the colony worlds. They deserved a chance to see home again. "All hands, this is the captain," Morrison announced over the ship's intercom. "Prepare for evacuation. Chief Watson, set the reactor to overload. In 10 minutes, maybe we can take a few of them with us." "Aye, sir," Watson replied. The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos as the crew prepared to abandon ship. Sergeant Major Pete Collins led his Marines to the escape pod bays while Medical Officer Dr. Helen Carter helped move wounded crew members. The ship's artificial gravity flickered on and off as more enemy fire hit the hull. Morrison stayed on the bridge until the last moment. He watched his people climb into escape pods and launch toward empty space. The pods were not fast enough to outrun Zalkani ships, but according to galactic law, the aliens could not fire on escape pods from a surrendering vessel. "Captain, you need to go," Barnes said. She had stayed behind to help with the evacuation. "After you, Lisa," Morrison replied. They ran through corridors filled with smoke and sparks from damaged systems. Emergency lighting cast red shadows on the walls, and the deck plates vibrated under their feet as explosions shook the ship. They reached Escape Pod Bay 7 just as Chief Watson arrived from engineering. "Reactors set to blow in 3 minutes," Watson reported. That should give us time to get clear. The three officers climbed into the last escape pod, and Morrison hit the launch button. The small craft shot out of the Defiance, just as the larger ship's lights went dark. Through the pod's small window, Morrison watched his ship drift dead in space while Zelkani vessels moved closer. "Look," Barnes pointed to the tactical display. "They're recovering all the escape pods." Morrison counted the blips on the screen. 47 pods had launched from the Defiance, and the Zelkani ships were tractoring them in one by one. The aliens worked quickly and efficiently. They had done this before. "At least the crew will live," Watson said quietly. The USS Defiance exploded 2 minutes later. The reactor overload lit up space like a small star and caught one of the Zelkani destroyers too close to the blast. The alien ship lost its shields and drifted away with its hull cracked open. Morrison felt a small satisfaction watching it happen. Their escape pod shook as a tractor beam locked onto it and pulled it toward the Zelkani command carrier. Through the window, Morrison could see other human escape pods being drawn into the massive ship's landing bays. Soon all 47 pods would be inside enemy hands. "What do you think they'll do with us?" Barnes asked. "Standard prisoner processing," Morrison replied. "Interrogation, then transfer to a detention facility somewhere in their space." Watson looked out the window at the alien ship growing larger. "I've heard their prisons are pretty comfortable. They follow galactic conventions about prisoner treatment." Morrison nodded, but said nothing. He had studied Zelkani military doctrine and knew they were honorable enemies who treated prisoners well. But he also knew something the aliens did not understand about humans. Being captured was not the end of the fight. It was just a change of battlefield. The escape pod landed in the carrier's bay with a soft thump. Through the window, Morrison could see Zelkani soldiers waiting with weapons ready but not pointed at the pod. Other human pods sat nearby, and he could see his crew members being led away by guards. A mechanical voice spoke in accented English through the pod's comm system. "Human prisoners, exit your craft slowly with hands visible. You will not be harmed if you comply with instructions." Morrison looked at his two officers. "Remember, we're still military personnel. We follow the code of conduct, and we look out for each other." "Yes, sir," Barnes and Watson replied together. Morrison opened the pod's hatch and stepped out onto the alien ship's deck. The gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth normal, and the air smelled like ozone and something else he could not identify. Zelkani guards surrounded them but kept their weapons lowered. A Zelkani officer approached with a translation device around its neck. "I am Lieutenant Corvex. You will be processed and assigned quarters aboard this vessel until transferred to a detention facility. Do you have wounded who require medical attention?" "Some of my crew were injured during the battle," Morrison replied. "They'll need treatment." "Our medical staff will examine all prisoners," the alien officer said. "You will find we treat captives according to galactic standards." As the guards led them through the ship's corridors, Morrison studied everything he saw. The layout of the passages, the location of weapon lockers, the duty stations they passed. His training as a military officer had taught him to gather intelligence in any situation. Being a prisoner did not change that duty, the Zelkani thought. They had captured defeated enemies. Morrison knew better. They had just taken aboard 200 human soldiers who were now operating behind enemy lines. The real battle was about to begin. Detention Facility Omega-7 looked like a metal asteroid floating in the darkness of the Vega system. The massive prison station had held alien prisoners from dozens of species over the past 50 years. Warden Kolvik had run the facility for the last 15 years and prided himself on never having a successful escape. The transport ship carrying the human prisoners docked at the station's main bay. Kolvik watched through his office window as guards led the 200 humans through processing. They looked smaller than he had expected. Most alien species that reached space travel were larger than humans, but these creatures seemed almost fragile compared to the massive Graken or the armored Thulix warriors he usually housed. "Sir, the human prisoners are being assigned to Section C," reported his assistant, a young Zelkani named Subwarden Nextal. "We've separated them by rank and gender as per standard protocol." Kolvek nodded. Dividing prisoners by their social structures usually created confusion and broke down group loyalty. It had worked on every species he had dealt with before. "Begin interrogation procedures tomorrow. Start with their senior officers." The next morning, guards brought Captain Morrison to Interrogation Room 5. The room was designed to be uncomfortable with bright lights, a metal chair bolted to the floor, and walls that could display disturbing images. Dr. Yexmar, the station's chief interrogator, had used this room to break the will of hundreds of prisoners. Morrison sat in the chair and looked calmly at the Zelkani interrogator. Dr. Yexmar studied the human's file on his datapad. According to Zelkani intelligence, humans were social creatures who needed contact with others to maintain mental health. Isolation should break this one quickly. "State your name and rank," Dr. Yexmar ordered. "Morrison, Jake, Captain, serial number 2847 Delta Golf. You will provide information about human fleet positions, ship capabilities, and planned operations." Morrison looked directly at the alien interrogator. "Morrison, Jake, Captain, serial number 2847 Delta Golf." Dr. Yexmar activated the room's psychological pressure systems. The lights became brighter and began to flicker. Strange sounds echoed from hidden speakers. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in 30 seconds. "Your ship was destroyed, and your fleet has abandoned you," the interrogator said. "Your government will not negotiate for your release. Cooperation is your only path to better treatment." Morrison repeated his name, rank, and serial number. 3 hours later, Dr. Yexmar returned Morrison to his cell feeling frustrated. The human had shown no signs of breaking under techniques that worked on other species. If anything, the prisoners seemed to be studying the interrogation room itself. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Commander Barnes was having her own session with a different interrogator. She had been awake for 72 hours, as guards prevented her from sleeping by making loud noises whenever she closed her eyes. The Zelkani expected her to become confused and willing to talk. Instead, Barnes used the time to count guard rotations and memorize the sounds of the station's mechanical systems. When Interrogator Melkex asked her about human military codes, she gave the same response Morrison had given. "Barnes, Lisa, Lieutenant Commander. Serial number 9156 Alpha Whiskey. You are tired and alone," Melkex said. "Your captain cannot help you here. Tell us about human encryption methods, and we will let you sleep." Barnes stared at a point on the wall behind the interrogator's head. "Barnes, Lisa, Lieutenant Commander. Serial number 9156 Alpha Whiskey." The real shock came when the Zelkani tried to use what they thought was human weakness against the prisoners. They brought Corporal Danny Rodriguez to the central courtyard, where other prisoners could see him through their cell windows. The guards had studied human behavior and believed that seeing their comrades suffer would make the others talk. They strapped Rodriguez to a chair and activated a pain inducer that sent electric shocks through his body. The device was set to cause discomfort without permanent damage, following Galactic prisoner conventions. They expected him to scream and beg, which would demoralize the watching humans. Rodriguez gritted his teeth against the pain and began reciting a military cadence. "I don't know, but I've been told Zelkani blood runs mighty cold." Other human voices joined in from their cells. even though they could barely hear him. "I don't know, but I've been told. Zelkani blood runs mighty cold." When the guards increased, the pain setting, Rodriguez switched to singing an old Earth song about soldiers who never gave up. Again, voices from the cell blocks picked up the tune. The sound carried through the prison's ventilation system until hundreds of human voices were singing together. The Zelkani guards looked at each other nervously. In 50 years of operation, no prisoners had ever responded to interrogation by singing. The sound was alien and disturbing in a way they could not explain. Warden Kolvek watched the scene from his office monitor and felt the first stirring of unease. These humans were not acting like defeated prisoners. They seemed to be communicating with each other despite being in separate cells. Sergeant Major Collins had indeed established a communication network using methods the Zelkani could not detect. A cough pattern meant stay strong. Footsteps in a certain rhythm conveyed guard positions. Even the way prisoners moved their hands when guards could see them carried messages. Within the first week, every human prisoner knew the basic layout of their section, the guard rotation schedule, and which aliens seemed nervous around them. Collins had recreated a military command structure inside the prison with clear chains of authority and communication. Dr. Helen Carter, the ship's psychologist, had been assigned to the medical wing where she was supposed to provide counseling that the Zelkani hoped would make humans more cooperative. Instead, she helped her fellow prisoners maintain their mental strength and resist interrogation techniques. "Remember," she told Private Kevin Murphy during his session, "they want us to feel helpless and alone. But we're not alone. We're part of something bigger than ourselves." Murphy nodded. He had been a history teacher before joining the military and understood what she meant. Like the prisoners at Colditz during World War II. Exactly. They never stopped being soldiers just because they were captured. The Zelkani did not understand what they were hearing during these medical sessions. They thought the humans were becoming more depressed and defeated. In reality, Carter was providing the mental tools that would keep the prisoners functioning as a military unit. Chief Engineer Watson had been placed in a cell designed to prevent technical sabotage. The walls were smooth metal with no visible controls or access panels. The Zelkani thought this would frustrate someone who worked with machinery. Instead, Watson used her engineering knowledge to study the prison itself. She listened to the sounds of power systems and air circulation. She watched how lights dimmed and brightened in different areas. She noted which sounds came from mechanical systems and which came from computers. By the end of the second week, Watson had figured out the basic power distribution for their section and identified several potential weak points. She shared this information with other prisoners using the communication system Collins had established. The Zelkani interrogators reported their lack of progress to Warden Kolvek. No human prisoner had provided any useful information despite 2 weeks of intensive questioning. Some seemed to be getting stronger rather than weaker under pressure. "Perhaps we should transfer some of them to other facilities," suggested Dr. Yexmar. "Separating them might break their group cohesion." Kolvek considered this option, but decided against it. Moving prisoners was expensive and complicated. Besides, no group had ever maintained their resistance for more than a month. These humans would break eventually. He did not know that Captain Morrison was holding daily briefings with his senior staff using hand signals during meal periods. The captain had not stopped planning military operations just because he was in a prison cell. He was gathering intelligence about Zelkani, security procedures, and preparing his people for whatever came next. The aliens thought they were holding defeated enemies. They were actually housing an organized military unit that had never stopped fighting. The humans were simply waiting for the right moment to show their captors what that meant. 3 weeks into their captivity, the humans began showing their true nature. What the Zelkani had mistaken for defeat was actually careful observation and planning. Every day brought new intelligence about the prison station and its weaknesses. Engineer Watson had discovered something important during her cell inspections. The ventilation system used standardized galactic components that she recognized from human ships. More importantly, the maintenance schedules followed predictable patterns that created opportunities. She shared her findings with Lieutenant Commander Barnes during their exercise period. The Zelkani allowed prisoners 1 hour daily in a common area under heavy guard. The humans used this time for more than physical fitness. The air recycling system shuts down for maintenance every 4th day at 0200 hours. Watson whispered while doing push-ups next to Barnes. The access panels are automated locks, not manual ones. Barnes nodded and continued her stretching routine. How long do we have when they're open? 15 minutes before the backup sensors activate. Long enough to move through 3 sections if we know where we're going. Nearby, Sergeant Major Collins led a group of Marines in what looked like basic exercises. In reality, he was teaching them hand-to-hand combat techniques adapted for fighting in confined spaces. The guards watched but saw nothing unusual in prisoners staying physically fit. Captain Morrison used mealtimes to brief his officers on what he had learned from studying guard behavior. The Zelkani followed strict routines and protocols that rarely changed. They were methodical and efficient, but not creative or flexible. They think in straight lines, Morrison explained to Dr. Carter while they ate the bland but nutritious prison food. Everything has rules and procedures. They don't adapt well when something unexpected happens. Carter understood the implications. So if we can create chaos, they won't know how to respond. Exactly. But we need to be smart about it. We get one chance at this. The first escape attempt came during the next maintenance cycle. Barnes had volunteered to lead a small reconnaissance team through the ventilation system. The plan was simple: gather intelligence about the station layout and find alternative routes between sections. At exactly 0200 hours, Barnes and 2 Marines named Scott Adams and Tony Rivers slipped out of their cells using lockpicks improvised from food containers. The human ability to create tools from everyday objects had surprised their captors from the beginning. They reached the ventilation access panel just as it cycled open for maintenance. The shaft beyond was barely large enough for a human to crawl through, but the 3 prisoners squeezed inside and began moving toward the central hub. The mission went perfectly for 12 minutes. Barnes mapped the layout of 3 prison sections and located the main security center. Rivers identified the location of the guard armory. Adams found the communication array that connected the station to Zelkani Command. Then backup sensors detected their presence. Alarms sounded throughout the facility as automated systems sealed the ventilation shafts. Emergency lighting turned. The corridors read while guard squads rushed to search for the missing prisoners. The 3 humans were trapped in the air system with no way out. Security breach in Section C, announced the station's computer in multiple languages. 3 human prisoners have left their designated areas. Warden Kolvek arrived in the security center to find his staff tracking the humans through internal sensors. The prisoners were alive, but stuck in a shaft between the central hub and Section D. How did they escape their cells? He demanded. Unknown, sir. The locks were not damaged, and the guards saw nothing unusual during their last check. Kolvek studied the display showing the prisoners' location. Can we retrieve them? The maintenance hatches are sealed and won't reopen for 6 hours. We could cut through the bulkheads, but that would damage the air recycling system. Then we wait. They cannot survive long without proper air circulation. But the Zelkani had underestimated human endurance and determination. Barnes and her team used breathing techniques taught in military survival training to conserve oxygen. They remained conscious and alert even as carbon dioxide levels rose in the sealed shaft. More importantly, they used the time to complete their mission. Rivers dismantled part of the shaft wall and discovered fiber optic cables at Carried Station. Communications. Adams found junction boxes that controlled power distribution to 3 prison sections. Barnes located the main data conduit that connected all security systems. When rescue teams finally cut them out, 6 hours later, the 3 humans were unconscious but alive. The Zalkani medical staff treated them for oxygen deprivation and returned them to their cells after determining they had suffered no permanent damage. What the aliens did not realize was how much intelligence the failed escape had provided. Barnes briefed Captain Morrison on everything they had discovered using sign language during their medical examinations. The human prisoners now had detailed knowledge of the station's critical systems and security weaknesses. The Zalkana response was predictably methodical. They increased guard patrols, installed additional sensors in the cells, and modified the ventilation maintenance schedule to prevent future attempts. Warden Kolvek was satisfied that he had contained the threat. He was wrong. Morrison used the new intelligence to develop a comprehensive plan for taking control of the prison station. The escape attempt had been a reconnaissance mission disguised as a failed breakout. Now the humans knew exactly where to strike and when. The captain held a covert staff meeting in the exercise area the next day. Using hand signals and coded conversation, he outlined his strategy to key personnel. The plan was ambitious and dangerous, but it had one crucial advantage. The Zalkani would never expect prisoners to attempt a hostile takeover of the facility. "We don't just escape," Morrison signaled to his officers. "We capture the station and use it against them." Sergeant Collins understood the implications immediately. Instead of running away like defeated prisoners, they would turn the tables and become the hunters. It was a plan that could only work if every human performed their role perfectly. Dr. Carter had been observing the psychological state of their guards during the past 3 weeks. The Zalkani were becoming nervous and frustrated with their human captives. They had never dealt with prisoners who seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker over time. "They're afraid of us," she reported to Morrison. "They don't understand why we won't break like other species." Watson had been working on the technical aspects of the plan. She had identified the key systems that needed to be controlled simultaneously to prevent the Zalkani from calling for help or activating automated defenses. "I need access to 3 different control nodes at the same time," she explained. "The communication array, the power distribution center, and the security mainframe. If we take all 3 within 60 seconds, we can lock down the entire station." Morrison nodded. The plan required precise timing and absolute commitment from every participant. There would be no second chances and no retreat if something went wrong. Private Murphy had been tasked with psychological warfare operations. His background as a history teacher made him perfect for understanding how to break enemy morale. He had been sharing stories with other prisoners about human military victories against impossible odds. "The guards listen when we talk during meals," he told Morrison. "They're curious about human history, but they don't understand what they're hearing." "What do you mean?" "They think our war stories are just entertainment. They don't realize we're telling them exactly what we're going to do." To them, Morrison smiled for the first time since his capture. The Zalkani had made a fundamental error in judgment. They thought humans were just another defeated species to be processed and contained. They had no concept of what it meant to cage creatures who had never truly surrendered. The real battle was about to begin, and this time the humans would not be fighting to escape. They would be fighting to win. 2 months after their capture, the humans struck back with devastating efficiency. The operation began at 0347 hours during the night shift, when the fewest guards were on duty. Captain Morrison had timed everything perfectly using intelligence, gathered during weeks of careful observation. The first phase started in the medical wing, where Dr. Carter had been treating a fake illness for 3 days. When Nurse Medkey came to check on her patient, Carter grabbed the alien's arm and used a pressure point technique to render her unconscious. The human doctor quickly stripped the nurse of her security badge and communication device. Simultaneously, Chief Watson created a diversion in Section C by causing a power fluctuation that looked like equipment failure. She had been slowly loosening connections in her cell's electrical system for weeks, waiting for this moment. When the lights flickered and went out, the automated systems triggered emergency protocols. Guard squads rushed to investigate the power failure, leaving other areas of the station undermanned. This was exactly what Morrison had planned for. In the confusion, Sergeant Collins and 5 Marines overpowered their guards, using weapons fashioned from metal strips torn from their beds and sharpened against the cell walls. The violence was swift and brutal. The humans moved with military precision while their captors struggled to understand what was happening. These were supposed to be defeated prisoners, not organized soldiers launching a coordinated assault. Collins led his team to the guard armory while Watson guided another group toward the power distribution center. Lieutenant Barnes took a third team to secure the communication array. Each group knew exactly where to go and what to do thanks to the intelligence gathered during their reconnaissance mission. The Zelkani guards had been trained to manage passive prisoners, not fight determined soldiers. When human prisoners suddenly became attackers, the aliens found themselves outmatched by enemies who fought with desperate cunning and intimate knowledge of the station layout. Barnes reached the communication center first and used the security badge stolen from the medical wing to access the control room. The lone technician on duty looked up in surprise as armed humans burst through the door. Disable all outgoing transmissions, Barnes ordered in broken Zelkani that she had learned by listening to guard conversations. The technician reached for an alarm button, but found himself facing a sharpened metal strip held against his throat. Barnes had not survived 3 years of war by being merciful to enemies who threatened her mission. Comply or die, she said simply. The alien's clawed hands moved over the control panel, shutting down the station's ability to call for help. Barnes then used the captured communication device to contact Watson's team. Communications secured, beginning data download. Watson had reached the power center with 4 other prisoners, including Private Murphy and Corporal Rodriguez. The engineering spaces were familiar territory for someone who had spent 15 years working on human starships. The Zelkani used different technology, but the basic principles were the same. Cut power to the security systems, but leave life support online, Watson ordered her team. We need the guards to surrender, not suffocate. Her people worked quickly to disconnect the automated defense systems that could have sealed off sections of the station or released sleeping gas into the air circulation. Within minutes, the prison's electronic defenses were disabled. Meanwhile, Collins and his Marines had taken the armory after a brief but fierce fight with the guards stationed there. The sergeant major now had access to military-grade weapons and equipment that turned his people from desperate prisoners into a proper assault force. All teams, this is Collins, he announced over the captured communication system. We have weapons and the station is secure. Begin Phase 2. Phase 2 was the part of the plan that would have seemed impossible to any other species. Instead of trying to escape from the prison station, the humans began hunting their former captors through the corridors they now controlled. Captain Morrison led the main assault team toward the command center, where Warden Kolvek was trying to understand how his maximum security facility had been overrun in less than an hour. The alien commander had sent distress signals but received no response because Barnes had cut all communications. Sir, the humans have taken control of the armory and disabled our security systems, reported Subwarden Nextel. His voice carried a note of panic that Kolvek had never heard from a Zelkani. Officer, how many have escaped their cells? All of them, sir. They're operating in organized units throughout the station. Kolvek felt something he had never experienced in 50 years of managing alien prisoners. These humans were not trying to escape. They were hunting him and his staff like predators who had been freed from their cages. The warden activated the station's internal defenses, but nothing happened. The automated systems that should have sealed blast doors and activated emergency protocols had been systematically disabled by someone who understood their function. Morrison's team reached the command center and found it protected by a dozen guards with military weapons. The captain smiled coldly as he studied the defensive positions. His enemies had made the mistake of thinking like prison guards instead of soldiers. "Collins, we need a distraction at the main entrance," Morrison said into his captured communicator. "On it, Captain." The sergeant major's Marines created a noisy assault on the command center's front doors while Morrison led his people through maintenance tunnels that Watson had identified weeks earlier. The humans emerged behind the Zelkani defensive line and attacked from an unexpected direction. The battle was over in minutes. Zelkani guards who had been trained to intimidate prisoners found themselves facing combat veterans who had been planning this operation for 2 months. The aliens surrendered when they realized their situation was hopeless. "Warden," Kolvek looked up from his command console to find Captain Morrison pointing a Zelkani plasma rifle at his head. The human officer's expression was calm and professional, like a soldier completing a routine mission. "Warden, you are now a prisoner of war," Morrison announced. "Your station is under human control." Kolvek's yellow eyes showed confusion and fear. "This is impossible. You were defeated and captured. How did you take my facility?" Morrison smiled without humor. "We were never defeated. We were gathering intelligence." The truth hit the alien commander like a physical blow. These humans had spent 2 months studying his prison, learning its weaknesses, and preparing for this moment. What he had thought was imprisonment had actually been a reconnaissance mission. "You cannot escape," Kolvek said desperately. "There are Zelkani fleets throughout this system. They will come for you." "Let them come," Morrison replied. "We'll be ready." The captain was not bluffing. While his assault teams had been taking control of the station, Watson and her technical specialists had been downloading every piece of data from the Zelkani computer systems. Fleet positions, ship specifications, military codes, prisoner locations, strategic plans, everything the aliens had stored in their databases was now in human hands. More importantly, the humans had turned detention facility Omega-7 into a military base behind enemy lines. The station's weapon systems were still functional, and Watson had figured out how to operate them. The captured Zelkani destroyer in the docking bay gave them a way to return to human space when they were ready. But Morrison was not ready to leave yet. He had spent 2 months learning how the Zelkani thought and operated. Now he intended to use that knowledge to strike back at the empire that had captured his ship and crew. "Dr. Carter," he called over the communication system, "how are our former guards adapting to their new circumstances?" Carter's voice came back with a note of satisfaction. "They're experiencing significant psychological stress, Captain. Apparently being prisoners is a new experience for them." Morrison nodded. The Zelkani were about to learn what it felt like to be caged by an enemy who understood the true nature of warfare. The humans had not just escaped from prison. They had turned their captors into the captured. The legend of human prisoners of war was about to spread throughout the galaxy, and it would make every alien species think twice before taking humans alive in future conflicts. The escape from detention facility Omega-7 became the turning point that changed how every alien species viewed human prisoners. Captain Morrison and his crew did not simply flee back to human space. They turned the captured prison station into a forward operating base and began striking at Zelkani targets throughout the Vega system. For 3 weeks, Morrison used the station's communication arrays to intercept enemy transmissions and identify vulnerable targets. Chief Watson had learned to operate Zalkani technology better than most of their own technicians. The humans monitored fleet movements, supply convoys, and military installations across half the Empire. "Captain, we have a convoy of 6 transport ships moving through the outer system," reported Lieutenant Barnes from her position at the tactical station they had taken from the Zalkani. No escort vessels and minimal defensive systems. Morrison studied the tactical display that showed enemy ship positions in real time. What are they carrying? According to their transmission logs, medical supplies and replacement personnel for 3 military bases, said Private Murphy, who had proven surprisingly good at breaking alien encryption codes. "Take them," Morrison ordered the captured Zalkani. Destroyer launched from the station with a mixed crew of humans and cooperative alien prisoners. Morrison had discovered that some of the facility's inmates were actually political prisoners who had no love for the current Zalkani government. They were happy to help the humans fight their former captors. The convoy raid was swift and decisive. The transport ships surrendered without firing a shot when they realized they were facing their own destroyer with human crew. Morrison now had medical supplies for his people and intelligence data from 6 different sources. More importantly, he had sent a message throughout Zalkani space. The humans were not hiding or running away. They were actively hunting enemy targets and growing. Stronger with each victory, word of the prison break spread through alien communication networks, faster than official military reports. The story grew with each telling, becoming more terrifying as it passed from one species to another. Humans who had turned imprisonment into a military operation. Prisoners who became hunters within their own cells. Dr. Carter had been studying the psychological profiles of captured Zalkani personnel and made a disturbing discovery. The aliens were exhibiting trauma responses that their species had never experienced before. Being prisoners was completely outside their understanding of how warfare worked. "They don't know how to be captives," she explained to Morrison during one of their daily briefings. "Their entire military doctrine assumes that defeated enemies either die in battle or surrender completely. They have no mental framework for continued resistance." Morrison used this weakness ruthlessly. He treated the captured Zalkani exactly as they had treated human prisoners, using their own interrogation techniques against them. The results were devastating to alien morale. Warden Colvett broke after only 5 days and provided detailed information about Zalkani prison facilities throughout their empire. Sub-Warden Nextall lasted 3 days before revealing the locations of other human prisoners being held in different systems. The intelligence gathered from these interrogations allowed Morrison to plan rescue operations that freed hundreds of human prisoners from facilities across Zalkani space. Each successful mission added to the growing legend of human prisoners who refused to stay captured. Lieutenant Commander Barnes led one of these rescue missions to a facility in the Altair system where 30 human officers were being held. The raid was planned using intelligence provided by their former captors and executed with precision that stunned the Zalkani defenders. "We hit them at shift change when they had minimum guards on duty," Barnes reported after returning to Omega-7. The facility surrendered in 20 minutes. They were so terrified of fighting human prisoners that they gave up without a real battle. Sergeant Major Collins had been training the rescued prisoners in advanced combat techniques using captured Zalkani weapons and equipment. The humans were adapting alien technology faster than its creators had expected, improving weapon systems and tactical procedures with each engagement. "The plasma rifles work better if you modify the focusing crystals," he explained to a group of newly rescued Marines. Chief Watson figured out how to increase their power output by 30%. Watson herself had become something of a legend among both human and alien prisoners. Her technical expertise had turned captured enemy equipment into weapons that exceeded original specifications. She was also working on a project that would change the nature of the conflict entirely. "Captain, I've finished analyzing the Zelkani hyperspace navigation system," she announced during a staff meeting 6 weeks after the original escape. "I know how to modify our ships to jump directly into their home system." Morrison looked up from the tactical reports he had been studying. "Their home system is protected by 3 defensive fleets and orbital weapons platforms." "Yes, sir. But they're not expecting an attack from ships using their own navigation codes. We could appear right in the middle of their defenses before they realize we're hostile." The plan that emerged from this discovery was audacious beyond anything the Zelkani could imagine. Instead of continuing guerrilla operations in border systems, Morrison intended to strike at the heart of the Empire with ships crewed by former prisoners. The operation launched 3 months after the original prison break. Morrison led a fleet of 12 captured Zelkani vessels, crewed by humans who had been rescued from detention facilities throughout enemy space. Each ship carried soldiers who had spent months learning alien technology and tactics. The fleet jumped directly into the Zelkani home system using navigation codes extracted from their former captors. They appeared in orbit around the Empire's capital world before defensive systems could react. The surprise was complete and devastating. "This is Admiral Morrison of the Human Defense Force," the former prisoner announced over open communication channels. "We demand the immediate release of all human prisoners and the withdrawal of Zelkani forces from contested systems." The alien response was predictable. 3 defensive fleets moved to engage the human vessels, while orbital platforms charged their weapons. But Morrison had spent months studying Zelkani military doctrine and knew exactly how they would respond. Humans scattered their fleet and began attacking industrial targets and military installations throughout the system. They used Zelkani weapons against Zelkani defenders while broadcasting propaganda messages that demoralized enemy forces. The battle lasted 18 hours and ended with a negotiated ceasefire. The Zelkani government agreed to exchange all human prisoners for the return of their captured personnel and equipment. More importantly, they issued new military directives regarding human captives. Fleet Commander Vextar, the same alien who had captured Morrison's original ship, sent a coded message to all Zelkani forces throughout the Empire. The contents of that message would be remembered in military history for centuries. Human prisoners are not to be taken alive when avoidable. If capture is necessary, they must be transferred to secure facilities within 24 hours. Extended detention of human personnel is classified as an unacceptable risk to facility security and personnel morale. Other alien species monitoring Zelkani communications took note of this unprecedented directive. The Graken Empire issued similar orders to their fleets. The Thulix Confederation updated their prisoner protocols to specifically address human captives. Within 6 months, the Galactic Prisoner Exchange Commission issued a formal advisory to all member species. The document became known as the Human Captivity Protocol and established new procedures for dealing with human prisoners of war. The protocol stated that humans appeared to treat captivity as a temporary change of battlefield rather than a state of defeat. It recommended immediate prisoner exchanges when possible and warned against extended detention of human military personnel. Captain Morrison, now promoted to Admiral for his actions during the Omega-7 incident, established new training procedures for human military forces. Every officer learned advanced resistance techniques and prisoner operations doctrine. "We are never truly prisoners," became the motto of the Human Prisoner Resistance School. "We are human forces operating behind enemy lines until we can return to the fight." The psychological impact of this doctrine spread throughout alien military establishments. Species that had never feared captured enemies began to dread the prospect of holding human prisoners. The humans had turned what should have been their greatest weakness into a strategic advantage. 5 years after the Omega-7 escape, Admiral Morrison addressed a gathering of human military officers at the Defense Academy on Earth. His words became part of standard military doctrine and were taught to every soldier in the human defense force. The enemy believes that capturing U.S. makes us powerless, he told the assembled officers. They think prison walls can contain human determination and military training. They are wrong. Every time they take us prisoner, they invite our forces into their most secure facilities. Every detention center becomes a potential forward operating base. Every captured human becomes a reconnaissance asset gathering intelligence behind enemy lines.